all began with 4 orbs, spheres that carried the power to save the world or destroy it. They were labeled according to the 5 elements of Japanese mythology: earth, fire, wind, and water, with the 5th representing the void beyond our everyday understanding or experience. These were changed to crystals in the remakes of Final Fantasy that followed. The concept was strangely absent from the first sequel, but returned in 3 to birth the job system. Cecil began 4 by stealing the water crystal from Acidia, King Tycoon witnessed the wind crystal shatter in the beginning of 5, and the espers from 6 disintegrated into shards of crystallized magicite. 7's materia harken back to the sphere model, as they not only helped the heroes advance in power, but almost caused Meteor to run right through the planet. 8, like 2, had neither. Rather than receive their energy from objects, Squall and his classmates drew it directly through enemies, or points plugged into the planet. 9 reflected its sprite history by making a crystal caught between dimensions responsible for the existence of life on Gaia, but 10 and 10-2 jumped back to spheres as experience markers and puzzle pieces. 11 started literally with a spinning crystal, along with the set of 5 that created the diverse races. And although 12 deferred its spiritual source to the zodiac signs, their emblems were encased in ornate crystals once their corresponding espers had been defeated. The Sun Christ in 12 chipped off 3 shards of brand new nethicite that united Ivalice under the rule of King Wraithwall. 10 and a half of the 12 Final Fantasies have used crystals or orbs to serve as the emotional link to the planet's life force. If one were to create a Final Fantasy from scratch, deciding on one, the other, or neither is a good place to start. The 12 core entries bear no direct ties aside from rumors and mild suggestions, but their structure has held long enough to imprint several traits on the franchise. In this 13th and final chapter of our retrospective, let's look at the ones that left the most identifying marks. Following crystals and orbs, the story has to take shape, and there are several common themes to call upon when constructing the narrative. The kingdoms in each Final Fantasy have gotten bigger and bigger, but they've almost always been dominated by an ancient evil, or stood to oppress a much smaller rebellion. There has often been a conflict of nature versus technology. The later fantasies centered on an eternal struggle for the planet to renew itself. With their world imbalanced, a group would volunteer or be summoned to fulfill a destined ritual and vanquish the forces of evil single-handedly. The origin of the first gathering is unknown because you could assemble them yourself. The following 4 parties were all orphaned youths, or lost their parents as the conflict rose. The second team likely knew each other from childhood, as well as the third, which was raised by the same guardian. The fourth largely served in the military together, and the fifth discovered each other as the long journey began. The sixth joined a resistance group that first gave a name to the frequently outnumbered gathering of forces opposing the tyrannical government. Banon's army in 6 was called the Returners. Barrett's clan in 7 was known as Avalanche. Renoa's rebels waved the flag of the Forest Owls in 8. Baku's Tantalus troop in 9 might have thought that they were up to no good, but their actions ended up saving Princess Garnet and her kingdom. And 11 had Tenshodo and a number of other resistance groups. Aside from the Gullwings moniker, the alliances in 10 and 12 were anonymous. The team count was 4 in the first 3 Final Fantasies, 5 and 4, and 4 again in parts 5 and 6. It dropped to 3 in episodes 7 and 8, returned to 4 and 9, and went back to 3 in 10 and 10-2. 11 fanned out to 6 to accommodate multiplayer parties, and 12 halved the group once again to 3. To sum up, that's 4 with 3, 5 with 4, and 1 with 5 and 6. But numbers mean nothing without a solid combination of characters from varying classes. 5 was the first where you weren't able to finish the game with one of the members you started with, and 6 was the first that let you assemble a squad of numerous collected characters from a selection menu. The themes brought up in the naming of the playable populace stretch over a variety of influences. Aspects of nature heavily inspired many characters. Some draw symbols from Japanese culture, such as the original names of the main characters in 10, Tita and Yuna, being an Okinawan reference to the sun and moon. Others, such as Cloud and Squall, derive from English roots. Vivi, from 9, appears in numerous Romance languages as variances of the verb to live. Sarah, the subject of the first Final Fantasy quest ever, means princess in Hebrew, and Cain translates roughly as spear in the same language. Cain may also be a reference to the biblical deceiver who slew his brother and was branded an outcast by God. Some translations have even added meaning to words that had slim backgrounds to begin with. When 6 was translated into English, the protagonist, initially named Tina, which in Japanese is just a derivative of other female terms, was dubbed Terra by writer Ted Woosley, which means earth in Latin and monster in Greek. Once there was a crew to command, they were given attributes to aid them in battle and define their role in the party. Since Final Fantasy I, there have been 3 different ways to distribute them. The model used in the first game gave you options to mix and match, but the sprites themselves couldn't break out of their designated profession. This formula was repeated in 4, 9, 10, and to a lesser extent 6. 3 allowed you to swap job hats at random, and that system was refined in 5, 10.2, and the online 11. In parts 7, 8, and 12, classes held less weight, allowing you to customize your entire team to your liking. With the tools in place, you can't have good without evil. The villains of Final Fantasy have been known to steal the spotlight away from the honest heroes that fight bravely to stop them, but their defining qualities aren't always black and white. Some of the antagonists are fairly straightforward though. Garland and the Emperor of Palamecia seemed maliciously trapped in their desire to dominate the world, but after Zayand felt betrayed by Noah, he went on a revenge binge that has inspired several followers. These can occasionally obscure the true bad guy, as some would argue Hojo, or even Gast, is the true architect of Sephiroth's rage, and the murderous soldier was simply pushed too far. More often than not, there's more to the tale than meets the eye, such as Adia's reversal and eventual camaraderie. In a few others, the opposition you meet at the very beginning becomes the unthinkable evil you face in the end. The only antagonist who remained the sole architect of his world's demise from onset to conclusion was Kefka. No matter how fiercely you set your sights on the final fight, there's almost always one battle beyond it against who knows what. Only one constant remains. At some point, all their health bars have to hit 0. So you have your fighters, a call to action, a catalyst for Armageddon, and several symmetrically positioned temples housing exactly what you need to restore peace. All the good guys need now is a way to get there. The first transport earned in a Final Fantasy belonged to a pirate, and a crew of scallywags would give up their air or seafaring vessel again in 2, 5, and most recently 12. Canoes were issued late in 1 and earlier in 2, but only permitted river passage and were omitted from installment 3 onward. The canoe's cousin, the raft, appeared occasionally in 6 to split the party and, ironically, bring it back together. Boats began going below ocean level in 3, and submarines surfaced a second time in 5, and a third and last time in 7. 6, 7, and 8 all barely escaped from high-speed train sequences, from derailing to deboarding to fighting the engine itself. The hovercraft was exclusive to the 4th chapter until 8, when Balam Garden went mobile. 8 also contributed numerous four-wheelers to the long list of series vehicles. All of these modes of travel, whether manually operated or not, merely acted to redirect players until they were able to take flight. Airships have been in every core Final Fantasy game, and no resistance stood a chance without at least one, since they were prone to being destroyed and rebuilt. They first housed living quarters in 3, added tools and armaments in 4, morphed into multiple forms in 5, and migrated to Mode 7 in 6. Final Fantasy VII deployed choppers, 4 launched a spaceship, 8 stepped even further out into the stars, and 9 brought some of the original sprite concepts into 3D. 11 let you enjoy the view from the top deck, but 10, 10.2, and 12 all teleported you directly via short cutscenes. With the exception of 1 and 6, the majority of the world's aeronautic endeavors were conceived by one man. Cid's appearance and allegiance is never quite the same in each game, so it's always hard to guess what he'll look like or where the engineer might pop up. His name, Shido in Japanese, is rumored to come from the tale of the immortal Spanish conqueror El Cid, or from the engine tuning term representing cubic inches displaced, or CID for short. If Cid's not around, you can always make Talon tracks. Since Final Fantasy II, chocobos have been willing to seek out the ends of the earth as long as you don't let go of the reins. They hid out in secret farms in 2, 3, and 4, started the trek from the get-go in 5, and became available for rent in 6. In 3D, they became less of a necessity and often required the dual act of taunting and taming. As extras, they hit the races in 7, a peripheral in 8, got hot and cold in 9, and finally followed you wherever you went, as long as you treated them right, in 11. Despite their mediocre significance in 10 and 12, they have yet to miss a game since their introduction. And it's impossible to imagine a Final Fantasy game without them. It's also difficult to conceive a world of crystals and chocobos without Moogles, who first appeared as Doga's security service in 3, but oddly skipped 4 entirely. They guided you to their hidden forest in 5, where you could briefly walk amongst their tribe, but they finally joined the party in 6, saving Terra from an advancing army, and introduced Mog, who could equip the invaluable Moogle charm that allowed you to journey without the worry of enemy encounters for the first time. Since then, Mog and his cuddly wanderers have appeared to facilitate anything from synthesis to saving your game to selling everyday items. Their name in Japanese is a fusion of the words for mole and bat. Despite these animal influences, their appearance has varied greatly over the years. About the only thing that remains the same is their trademark poof on a wire, or pom-pom. Moogles can preserve your progress, and chocobos can chase the horizon for days, but you'll need some trusty steel to make it through each dungeon alive. Excalibur, from the King Arthur legend, and the Masamune, named after the Japanese swordsmith, have been top-tier blades since Game 1. The Bloodsword, Ragnarok, Save the Queen, and Ultima Weapon would challenge their supremacy in later installments. No matter what the class system, characters will often only be able to wield certain weapons. Class, along with Magicite and Zodiac crystals, also determines which characters can arm themselves with the deadliest artillery of all, summons. In some cases, these otherworldly creatures were atmosphere or merely another branch of spellcasting. However, infamous summoners such as the likes of Rydia, Garnet, and Ico, or the beings themselves, such as the Espers of 6 and the Faith of 10, were focal points and drove the plot forward. Espers, Eidolons, Avatars, or Aeons, they've had many monikers, reinventions, and systems. With the exception of the beings that made up the totema of Tactics Advance and the Espers of Final Fantasy XII, which were comprised of original concepts as well as prior Final Fantasy nemeses, most of the summoned creatures throughout the series remained part of the same circle. The pool has ranged from being as few as 8 in its debut in 3 to as many as 27 in the original release of Final Fantasy VI. Most, if not all, of these astral creatures were inspired by classic mythology from a number of cultures. The two beings that appear most throughout the series, Ifrit and Shiva, reflect two cultures from which Final Fantasy drew a great amount of inspiration. In the Arabic tradition, the Afriti, or Afriti, were a violent and cruel race of genii that were often associated with fire. Shiva, one of the primary deities of the Hindu pantheon, was aligned to a number of abstract concepts, such as creation and destruction. Arabic myth also yielded Bahamut, a gigantic aquatic creature similar to a whale, that carried the bull Kuyata, another Final Fantasy summon, upon its back. From Hinduism, there was the gigantic Garuda, one of the mounts of the god Vishnu, as well as the goddess Lakshmi, the correctly translated form of Starlet, who is the matron of beauty and fertility. Hinduism also held the gods Rama, the seventh avatar of Vishnu, and Indra, a deity of weather and war, both of which inspired Ramu, who helped guide the player down the path of summoning in a number of games. The rarely referenced Judeo-Christian mythology inspired the great serpent Leviathan, which was mentioned several times in the Old Testament of the Bible. Egyptian culture called forth the phoenix, a beautiful golden bird that would burst into flames at the end of its life, only to rise again from the ashes, as well as the ancient citadel city of Alexandria, which inspired the summon Alexander. In addition to the many monsters Greek mythology threw at the players, it also contributed the summons Titan and Siren. The Titans were children of Uranus and Gaia, and precursors to the Olympian gods. The Sirens were vicious mermaid-like creatures whose deadly song has been set upon such heroes as Jason and Odysseus. Far to the north, the Norse traditions inspired the omnipotent Odin, father of the gods. In battle, he sat atop his 8-legged steed Sleipnir and wielded the mighty lance Gungnir. On the day of Ragnarok, the inevitable end of creation, the world would be torn apart by the great wolves Fenrir and Garm. Odin was fated to be devoured by Fenrir, who would be in turn slain by Odin's son. These are the basics when building a Final Fantasy RPG, but these quest ingredients typically only make up about 60% of the hours and hours fans are willing to invest in each game. The other 40% is filled with side stories, mini-games, and various added bonuses that are extra diversions for some players, but required material to others. When available, you could wager your weapons and your life in the Colosseum, become a bounty hunter of rare monsters, recruit additional party members, engage in a heated magic card confrontation, carve up a mountain, go for the goal inside a giant fishbowl, and much more. The story often set up these distractions, leaving the option open to unlock a rare treasure once the mode was mastered. All this is what it means to be Final Fantasy, but that's not to say multiple other role-playing franchises don't follow the same rules. As the magnitude of each adventure's time commitment and sales demonstrate, success requires one last crucial element: a brilliant creative staff. Hironobu Sakaguchi, despite doubts and disbelievers, was the mind that started it all. He directed the first 5 games in the series and produced the 7 installments after. Following 9, which he considered to be the finest example of what a Final Fantasy game should be, he founded Mistwalker Studios with Microsoft and officially left Square in 2003. It's difficult to accurately pinpoint specific details he's brought to the franchise over the years, outside of his leading roles, but obviously, Final Fantasy wouldn't exist without him. Nobuo Uematsu's influence cannot be understated. In his relationship with Square, he's composed over 600 tracks for Final Fantasy games, and that's just considering the core series. Over 50 of those have been character-specific themes. He started a music production company in 2004 called Smile Please, and has played keyboard for his FF-inspired metal band, the Black Mages, in at least 8 separate concert appearances and 2 albums. Although his primary focus now lies on Mistwalker projects, he contributes title anthems for Final Fantasy, and several songs he wrote 20 years ago are still irreversibly linked to the franchise. Yoshitaka Amano's illustrations, despite even today's standards of digital animation, are almost impossible to recreate in 3 dimensions, while still maintaining the original's intricate accents. His hand has stayed in the series from the very beginning, despite not designing characters for one of its games since 2001. He continues doing image illustration, logo design, and additional promotional artwork. When creative expression called for technical ingenuity, no single person has developed more systems for the series than Hiroyuki Ito. After sound designing and debugging the first 3 games, he formed Active Time Battles in 4, Jobs in 5, Espers in 6, and Junctioning in 8. He directed Final Fantasy IX and co-directed both 6 and 12. From advancement methods to combat pacing to party skill sets, Ito's code work stands as the foundation of each fantasy. Hundreds of creative minds have converged on the 12 core titles, but these 4 fantasy founders drew the blueprints that all others have followed. Final Fantasy V was the last game where they filled all of their original roles, but their inspirations will flourish in the sequels and spin-offs to come. They may not be the people behind the latest entries, but the franchise still has a bright future thanks to their legacy. Final Fantasy XIII is to be split into a 3-part series called Fabula Nova Crystallis that will include the 12th sequel and verses for the PS3, along with the Jito for mobile phones. Details at this point are vague, to say the least. While no remakes other than Final Fantasy IV DS are currently planned, a reunion brawler called Dissidia is coming to the PSP to pit the series' finest against each other, and end many popular fan debates once and for all. Looking back at 20 fantasy-filled years, it's a challenge not to marvel at the work put forth by Square and its eventual partner, Enix. Excluding ports and remakes, 27 games have been created that carry the brand, a library that can only be rivaled by Mario, Mega Man, and other pillars of gaming. As the franchise enters a third decade of development, its ultimate direction is unclear. The only thing final in Final Fantasy is its past. Sakaguchi's Hail Mary began with an orb, gathered light through a crystal, and will know no end as long as it lives in the hearts and minds of players around the world.